Hey guys, I want to talk with you about the case of Darlie Routier. It's getting a lot of attention, of course. It's been getting a lot of attention for many years. But I want you to think about something. Think about a few things here. People are saying, oh, Darlie's innocent. Really? Do you really believe there was an intruder who came by the house on foot, who somehow was able to enter the home to get the knife from the kitchen to cut the screen to enter the home through? Remember, the lights were on, the television was on at least, so it probably looked like somebody was awake, right? So this phantom intruder somehow got into the kitchen, got the knife, cut the screen, climbed through the window. I mean, why didn't he just knock on the door, right? If the lights were on. And then he supposedly stabbed two children who were sleeping on the floor of the living room, with their mother sleeping within just a couple of feet of them on the couch. And then he somehow attacked the mom, but she slept through it. And then she said she opened her eyes and he was standing at her feet, walking away from her. So he commits this terrible, terrible crime, and then he starts walking toward the garage so he can go climb out the window that he somehow magically got inside the house to get the knife to cut the screen to climb through it in the first place. Right. Darlie didn't know if she had been sexually assaulted, but her husband told her that her panties were missing. So she was sure to tell the doctors that her panties were missing. I read one time that while she was waiting for the ambulance driver to take care of her, she and her husband were standing out on the front step discussing the fact that her panties were missing and she needed to remember to tell the doctors that. And that when they took her blood pressure and her pulse, that her blood pressure and her pulse were both normal. That's kind of scary if you think about it. Remember, she had a wound too to her neck and also a wound to her arm. At her trial, the doctors would testify that those wounds were self-inflicted and superficial. Did she apply pressure to her children's wounds? No, she didn't. But she did apply pressure to her own wound. Did she get off the phone when the police officer told her to get off the phone and help her children? No, she didn't. She kept talking to the police dispatcher about whether or not there might have been fingerprints on the knife. Interesting. Did you know that just a couple of days after the murders, that one of the neighbors saw Darlie jumping up and down and cheering her husband on as they threw toys into the car that were left behind by strangers who had created a makeshift memorial for the boys who had been murdered. She was cheering him on like she was a wannabe cheerleader at a Friday night football game in high school, jumping up and down, laughing as the two of them tossed stuffed animals into their car. Did you also know that that silly string video was, I think, 30 seconds long? You know, the one that people are claiming convicted her of capital murder. And did you know that that 30-second video was actually part of a 45-minute interview, during which Darlie, as one juror said so eloquently, chomped her gum and smiled and laughed and even flirted with a reporter who, I've been told, was actually invited to the party. And I've been told that that news station actually paid the family a lot of money to be invited to the party. You know how they talk about the somber memorial service that took place that morning? Well, it's interesting that at Darlie's trial, they never presented that video of the somber memorial service that supposedly took place that morning. So far, the only clip of that event that we've seen is about 20 seconds long, and it shows the people in attendance actually bowing their heads in prayer, while Darlie is walking around and then plopping on the ground in the grass and looking rather bored. Did you know that Darlie was out of money? Did you know they were broke? Her husband had made good money for a couple of years straight, but it looks like Shop Till She Drops Darlie could outspend his income any day of the week. They were behind on taxes. I think they owed 10 grand. They were behind on the shop rent for her husband's business. There were some late notices in the garbage from the mortgage company. Darlie's charge card was maxed out. One of their cars was broken down, so they were down to one car, which meant that Darlie was stuck at home with the kids all day while her husband took her car to go to work. Did you know the day before the murders that Darlie was really angry that afternoon? And that according to the woman who was there doing her laundry for her, she started slamming the cupboard doors in the kitchen, and she actually started sharpening her knives. That's kind of eerie, don't you think? My hunch is that she became angry when she found out that her husband had taken off work early. It seems like the mechanic was trying to reach him. It sounds like the mechanic called the house. And then it sounds like Darlie confirmed with their one employee at the shop that her husband had in fact left around lunchtime and hadn't returned. They had a part-time employee too, Darlie's younger sister. And evidently her husband and her younger sister had taken the afternoon off together. Did you know that just a few days, or even maybe 5 or 6 days before the murders, that her husband tried to borrow $5,000 from the bank and he was turned down flat? He would later say that the loan was in order to buy the kid's sister a car, or a truck actually. Did you know that right before the murders, 91 minutes before the murders to be exact, that Darlie's husband went upstairs without her after what Darlie referred to as the two of them having words between them. Did you know that 1 month before the murders, Darlie had a really tough day? And she was in bed crying in the afternoon, and she was writing a note to her children asking them to forgive her for what she was about to do. She called her husband at work, and he came home early, found her up in the bedroom in tears. And she told him that she was contemplating suicide. He would later say that he became angry with her for how she was feeling, and they never spoke of it again. Her best friend called me at one point a couple of years ago and told me that she begged Darlie to get the help that she needed. She knew that something was wrong, and she begged Darlie's husband also to get help for her. But Darlie's response to her best friend was that if she went for help, that it wouldn't look good in the custody battle. Did you know that through some pretty amazing fundraisers and some huge donations from strangers, that they were able to actually hire the best legal defense team probably in the state of Texas at the time? Did you know that when they moved the trial, that it was actually at Darlie's request that the trial be moved? And did you know that one of her defense team members was a lawyer who was actually born and raised in the little town that they moved the trial to? Clearly, Darlie had every advantage heading into her trial, right? She had the best defense team that other people's money could buy. They were highly skilled, and they were so skilled, in fact, that they advised Darlie not to take the stand. And she refused to listen. And she got right up on the stand, and the jurors were able to see her in action as she seemed to be breaking down in tears after what appeared to be getting caught in her lies. The prosecutor would later say that Darlie was actually the state's best witness. So for all of you guys who are running around saying, oh my gosh, Darlie Routier's innocent. No, she isn't. She's guilty as sin. I don't believe in the death penalty, but in Texas they do. And I have a question. Why is it that it's, how many years ago was it? It was 1996. So 23 years ago, 23 years ago, June 6th of 1996 was when she murdered her sons. She was convicted of capital murder, actually, in February of 1997. So why is it that over 22 years ago she was sent to death row, but they have yet to set an execution date? I'm not saying they should because, again, I don't like the death penalty. But I think it's really interesting that over 22 years later, she's still sitting on death row, and there are still people raising money on her behalf, as they've been doing, it seems, from day one, when co-workers of Darlie's relatives were asked to donate to help with expenses. Did you know that in Darlie's case, it was the first time ever in the state of Texas that they ran over 100 tests? Did you know that they immediately called in experienced professionals? Because yes, the police department was small and they didn't have murders or any experience working on any murder cases necessarily. They were young and inexperienced. The first officer was very young. But you know what? They did their job, and they did their job well. That first officer rushed right in without waiting for backup, believing that there was an intruder, which is what Darlie said. He risked his life and rushed in to help protect that family and then also to help save the children. And when they realized how terrible this case was, they immediately called in for help. So this whole sales pitch, I guess I'd call it, now, so many years later, with people saying, oh, the police didn't do their job, they didn't know what they were doing. Baloney. They knew what they were doing because they brought in the best. They didn't work the case on their own. They brought in other agencies to help them. And people say, oh, the silly string tape convicted her. Baloney. That silly string tape probably was nothing more than confirmation for those jurors who had already sat through her trial and listened to the evidence. Do you know that to believe Darlie's story that she's innocent, that you would have to also believe that 50 or more professionals, doctors, nurses, police officers, crime scene technicians, that they would all have had to have gotten together and said, hey, let's go ahead and frame this girl. Let's go ahead and just frame the mother. Yeah, there's an idea. Let's do it. Everyone in? And to believe Darlie's story, that she's innocent, you would also have to believe that the phantom intruder somehow entered the home and didn't leave one footprint, thumbprint, fingerprint, hair, any DNA whatsoever behind. Did you know about the forensic testing that revealed that Darlie stood at the sink and self-inflicted her injuries? And did you know that the forensic testing also revealed that she cleaned up before dialing 911? Did you notice that when the coffee table was tipped over, evidently in a ruckus, right? Because remember, she wasn't sure if she had been sexually assaulted or not. That the centerpiece on the coffee table was actually very carefully placed so it wasn't damaged. Did you know that while Darlie was on the phone with a 911 operator, that she was checking to see if her jewelry had been stolen? Now keep in mind, her children were dying right before her eyes. Did she rush to her children and hold them in her arms? Did she apply pressure on their wounds? No. She was talking to the police dispatcher about whether or not her jewelry had been stolen. Darlie Routier is guilty, you guys. And this is just like the Stephen Avery case, in my opinion, because I think it's absolutely disgusting when these documentaries come out, obviously to make money, and they don't tell the full story. Do you really believe in the Stephen Avery case that 50 or more people, professionals, police officers, and all these different agencies working together, do you really believe that they stood there one day and said, hey, I know, let's go frame Avery? Do you really believe that he was going to get any money from that lawsuit? Seriously? Because I've got news for you. I highly doubt he would have seen a dime had that gone to trial. Do you really believe that when he was tossing the cat into the fire, that he was just hanging out with the wrong crowd? Because in fact, he doused the family pet in some sort of an accelerant, placed it into the fire, and when that cat crawled to the edge trying to breathe, he picked it up again and he threw it back into the center of the fire and he stood there and watched it burn. It's the same thing with the Darlie Routier case. I think it's disgusting for people to be committing slander, really, and libel against all of the professionals who worked on those cases because they did their jobs and they did their jobs well. Did you know that when Darlie went to the house for the first time after the murders with one of her friends, I think it was the friend that she was planning to head off to Cancun with for a girls' weekend, or actually I think a girls' week. Did you know that when she went inside the house for the first time, that her friend was kind of concerned about how she would take it, because that is where her children were murdered. And she looked at her friend and said, Darlie, is there something that you should be telling me? And Darlie ignored her question and began to complain about how much money it was going to take to fix the house back up because, there was damage from the blood-stained carpeting and all, and from the investigators actually taking out part of the kitchen sink in order to thoroughly test for evidence. Did you know that those bloody footprints of Darlie's were actually found underneath the broken wine glass that Darlie said had woken her up? Oh wait, that was her husband who said the wine glass woke him up. The swoosh, he said, it was like a soft swoosh of a wine glass breaking on the kitchen floor. Somehow he heard that from the bedroom. Well, other times I think he says that it was his wife screaming that woke him up. She didn't scream when she opened her eyes and saw the intruder standing at her feet, walking away from her. Her words, not mine. Even though he was a gun-toting husband, proud of carrying his firearm, and she knew it, she didn't scream for her husband to help her. She says that she followed the intruder and walked behind him, and when he dropped the knife on the floor, which is interesting, like what, he's leaving a murder weapon behind along with a victim who's alive and able to identify him? think about that one. And that when he dropped the knife on the floor, now keep in mind, she still isn't screaming for her husband. Instead, she picked up the knife and set it on the counter. Really? Well, those bloody footprints were underneath that wine glass. And Darlie didn't have any cuts on her feet. So do you get it now? The story she's been telling just doesn't work at all. You know, a lot of people now are trying to blame her husband for everything. Oh, he hired whatever. He was looking to hire someone to break into the house, blah, blah, blah. Right. Do you really believe that? Or do you think that that was his attempt to help Darlie's lawyers in one of her appeals a few years later? Because if you believe that story, that he was actually trying to hire someone to break into the house to stage some sort of an insurance scam and things got out of control, if you believe that story, then you would also have to believe the part of the story when they say that Darlie became upset about that and stormed out of the house when they were evidently visiting relatives. Evidently, in that appeal, there were 3 or 4 people who knew about the husband trying to hire someone to do the insurance scam. So that would mean that at the time of the murders, when the friends and family members were being interviewed by the police, that those 3 or 4 people who were present before the murders, when that supposed discussion took place, had all failed to mention to the police that it could have been somebody breaking into the house. Per Darlie's husband's request. You get what I'm saying? So when were they lying? At the time of the murders, or a few years later when it was time to try to appeal the conviction? I think the best thing that could happen in the case of Darlie Routier would be if she would own up to her actions and share with the world exactly what she was going through at the time. Did you know she was on fen-phen? Do you know what fen-phen is? Read up on it. Did you know that she claimed that she was sexually abused as a child starting at the age of 8 years old? Did you know that the Mother's Day before the murders, that the person she accused of sexually molesting her as a child was the person she handed her children over to in order to spend Mother's Day with him? Really? I think the best case scenario would be if Darlie would be honest and share with the world what happened so that other families could be saved. If they could even learn one thing from her story, maybe it would be that if your best friend is telling you, honey, you need help, I'm worried about you, that you don't worry about some custody battle down the road. Instead, you get the help you need. Or if you're a husband and you come home and your wife is in bed crying and writing a note to the children saying, forgive me for what I'm about to do, that you get her the help she needs. Or if you're not overweight but you want to lose a few extra pounds anyway because you have a trip to Cancun planned and you want to look really hot for a bunch of strangers, then it could be dangerous to be taking pills that promise to help you lose 10 pounds. Maybe people could learn from the case of Darlie Routier how dangerous it is to be living beyond your means to the point that you're ruining your marriage and causing yourself so much stress that maybe one night becomes unbearable. Maybe from the case of Darlie Routier, people can learn about Dr. Resnick's 4 categories of filicide and examine which category Darlie's case would fit in. I think personally that she committed what's called spousal revenge filicide. I think she was concerned that her mother-in-law would get custody of their children, and she decided that she was going to hurt her husband in the worst way possible. I also think that Darlie had a certain aversion to actually working. She had worked for a very short time when her husband got her a job back when she was like 18 or 19 or 20 years old. And one day, after just a couple of weeks of working there, she came in and reported to work saying that she had just fallen in the parking lot and she was in pain. Because, of course, if her husband did leave her, she would have had to have gotten a job. And I don't think that's how Princess Darlie planned on living her life.